The Earth does not speak the way we do. It doesn't carve letters into stone or record its thoughts in books. Instead, it remembers in layers. It writes its history in ice, in dust, in sediment, in the quiet chemical signatures left behind by everything that has ever lived or died on its surface. If you know how to read those layers, if you know how to listen to the planet's slow, ancient language, you start to see something deeply unsettling. The Earth remembers things that humanity has forgotten. And some of those memories do not match the story we tell ourselves about who we are or where we came from. When a geologist slices open a column of ice taken from the heart of Antarctica, they are not just holding frozen water. They are holding trapped fragments of ancient atmosphere, tiny bubbles exhaled by worlds long vanished. Each thin band of white or blue marks a season that passed tens thousands of years ago. Within those bands lie traces of volcanic winters, sudden warmings, ocean collapses, and strange chemical anomalies that no one fully understands. These are not just environmental markers. They are chapters of Earth's biography, written with absolute honesty, without the bias or amnesia that plagues human history. And what's odd, what makes scientists pause, is that some of these chapters feel out of place, like pages from a different book that somehow ended up wedged inside ours. Layers showing spikes in carbon that should not exist, traces of metals and compounds that appear abruptly and then vanish, patterns that look disturbingly similar to the chemical footprints we ourselves are leaving behind today. The official explanation is always natural causes, a volcanic chain, a comet impact, an abrupt climate shift. And often that is true. But sometimes the signatures don't align with anything we understand. Sometimes the anomalies look artificial, as if something or someone once altered the planet's chemistry long before Homo sapiens learned to write. It sounds impossible, but so did the idea of continents drifting. So did the idea that humans once lived alongside megafauna. So did the idea that people navigated oceans thousands of years before the compass. History has always expanded to fit new evidence, and lately the evidence has been pushing outward faster than the textbooks can keep up. Sediment cores pulled from the ocean floor tell a similar story. Each layer of mud is a snapshot of life at that moment in time. The pollen of ancient forests, the shells of microscopic creatures, the dust from distant deserts carried across the sea. These layers reveal when coastlines drowned, when glaciers collapsed, when vast regions of the Earth burned in sudden waves of fire. They also reveal, unmistakably, moments when something dramatic disrupted the planet's natural rhythm, moments when warming or cooling happened far too quickly, moments when chemical spikes appear with no known natural source. If you overlay these anomalies with global mythology, something strange emerges. Flood legends align with meltwater pulses. Fire myths align with volcanic winters and meteor impacts. Stories of a world before this one appear in nearly every culture on Earth. It's as if ancient humans witnessed the aftermath of something catastrophic, something powerful enough to erase an entire chapter of civilization, and preserved it the only way they could, through myth. But myths fade, stories mutate, entire cultures vanish, stone erodes. What remains, what never lies, is the planet itself. And the planet's memory is telling us that something came before us, or at least something happened before us that left scars, scars that don't match the simple picture of human development we like to imagine. The deeper scientists dig, the more complicated the story becomes. Consider the Younger Dryas, a sudden global freeze that struck about 12,800 years ago. For reasons still debated, Earth's temperature plummeted, megafauna died out, and early human cultures were nearly wiped from existence. Some evidence points to a comet impact, others to a massive meltwater collapse. But a small group of researchers quietly asks a different question. What if the event didn't just end an age, but erased one? After all, the geological record suggests a severe contraction of human population, a bottleneck so extreme that most genetic diversity was lost. When a species goes through such a bottleneck, the survivors remember almost nothing of what came before. Culture dies, technology dies, knowledge dies. All that remains are fragments, instincts, inherited patterns, and stories reduced to symbolic shadows of events no one can fully recall. What if early humans weren't the beginning of the story, but the survivors of its reset? The Earth's layers make this idea difficult to ignore. Every time scientists drill deeper, they discover events more dramatic, more sudden, more violent than previously believed. Entire forests turn to ash in a single season. Coastlines swallowed in decades, not centuries. Massive tsunamis triggered by collapsing glaciers. Lightning storms that raged for years without stopping. A world in chaos, a world resetting itself. If an advanced civilization existed during these transitions, its ruins wouldn't survive. Wood vanishes, metal rusts, concrete crumbles, even plastics degrade under geological pressure. After a few thousand years, cities would collapse into dust. After a few million, tectonic cycles would swallow everything into the mantle. The only evidence that could remain is the subtle chemical echo of whatever that civilization did to its environment. But that is exactly the sort of evidence scientists are starting to find. Not conclusive, not loud, but enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to spark quiet papers, whispered discussions, hesitant conferences. Enough to make the most cautious researchers admit, at least privately, that our planet may have hosted more than one rise of intelligence. Because when you read Earth's memory carefully, you start to see patterns, cycles repeating long before humans entered the stage. Warmings that resemble our industrial footprint. Carbon spikes matching our modern emissions. Sediment layers that mirror the pollution signatures we're producing right now. These ancient echoes are faint, incomplete, and easy to dismiss, but they are there, and they force a question none of us are ready to answer. What if humanity is not the first species to unlock technology? What if we are simply the first species to leave behind metal skyscrapers and satellites? What if intelligence arises, collapses, and arises again, each time leaving only thin chemical fingerprints buried deep in stone? The Earth remembers. It always remembers. Even when we forget. Even when an entire civilization disappears and becomes nothing more than a rumor told by wind and water. And if the planet is holding the secrets of a forgotten world, then part 2 of this journey, the impossibly ancient structures scattered across our continents, may hold the next clue. If you want to understand why so many scientists, researchers, and explorers quietly suspect that our history might not be as simple as we think, you don't begin with myths or chemistry. You begin with stone. Because stone doesn't lie. Stone endures. Stone remembers the hands that shaped it long after the names of those hands have vanished. And when you look closely at the oldest stones humans ever carved, you start to notice something profoundly strange. Some of them shouldn't exist. Not with the level of civilization we assume existed at the time. Not with the tools we believe humans had. Not with the knowledge our textbooks say they possessed. Consider Göbekli Tepe, a site older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than cities. 12,000 years old by conservative estimates, and yet its builders carved multi-ton pillars, arranged them in circles, filled them with symbolic art, and aligned them with celestial markers that demand a deep understanding of astronomy. According to our traditional timeline, humans were supposed to be nomadic hunter-gatherers then, people who hadn't invented writing, farming, or complex social organization. And yet, someone at Göbekli Tepe quarried stones weighing up to 20 tons, transported them uphill, shaped them into pillars, decorated them with reliefs of cosmic animals, and arranged them in patterns matching the sky. If this is the work of hunter-gatherers, then our understanding of ancient humans is either profoundly wrong, or they inherited knowledge from a source we haven't identified. But Göbekli Tepe is only the beginning. because once you recognize how out of place it is, you start seeing similar anomalies scattered across the world like fragments of a story we no longer remember. In Egypt, the Great Sphinx bears erosion patterns that some geologists argue could have only come from heavy rainfall, the kind that hasn't touched the Giza Plateau since the end of the last ice age, thousands of years before the first pharaoh. If that's true, then the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt entirely, and we're forced to ask, who carved it? And why did they choose to build something that would outlast their memory? In South America, at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, enormous stones fit together with such astonishing precision that not even a sheet of paper can slip between them. Many weigh more than 50 tons, shaped into interlocking polygons that look less like the work of Bronze Age craftspeople and more like the output of an engineering team with access to tools we no longer possess. Their angles are sharp, their surfaces polished smooth, their joints cut so intricately that earthquakes, storms, and centuries of erosion still cannot break them apart. Modern engineers, when asked to replicate these structures with ancient tools, fail again and again. The cuts are too clean, the fits are too perfect. The placement of the stones requires a level of planning and measurement that contradicts the technological limitations of the cultures we associate them with. And yet, the stones are undeniably ancient. They were not placed by modern hands. They were not shaped with modern machines. They are relics of something older, something we cannot fully explain. And what makes this even stranger is how similar these architectural mysteries are across continents separated by oceans and thousands of years. Pyramid structures appear in Egypt, Mesoamerica, China, Sudan, Indonesia. Stone circles emerge in Britain, Africa, the Middle East. Megalithic terraces appear in Peru, Easter Island, the Mediterranean. Despite the distances, the themes repeat. Monumental architecture aligned with the sky. Buildings that track solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles. Structures scaled with ratios like pi and the golden section long before those numbers were supposedly discovered. It's as if ancient humans everywhere were following a blueprint, not identical, but unmistakably connected in spirit. For example, the Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned almost perfectly to true north, with an error margin so tiny that replicating it today would require advanced surveying instruments. Yet we're told the builders accomplished this with nothing more than rope, sticks, and the naked eye. Meanwhile, the pyramid's dimensions encode mathematical constants with eerie precision. The ratio of its height to its base approximates pi, and its proportions reflect the curvature of the Earth itself. These could be coincidences, but why do so many coincidences appear in structures built by cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other? In Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan sits at a latitude whose mathematical relationship to Earth's geometry mirrors that of Giza. The layout of the city aligns with celestial events and reflects a level of urban planning so complex that some researchers compare it to mapping systems used by modern engineers. In Cambodia, the temples of Angkor mirror the constellation Draco as it appeared in the sky thousands of years ago, not during the time the temples were built, but in an era long forgotten. To replicate these alignments, ancient builders had to observe the heavens for centuries, maybe millennia, tracking the slow wobble of Earth's axis, a phenomenon called precession. This wobble shifts the positions of stars so gradually that it takes over 26,000 years to complete one full cycle. How could ancient civilizations have mapped the sky with such depth and precision unless they inherited records far older than themselves? As you examine more sites, the anomalies multiply. Underwater ruins near Japan, shaped like stepped terraces. Massive stone blocks near Easter Island, lying abandoned as if the builders vanished mid-project. Enormous monoliths at Baalbek in Lebanon, weighing more than 1,200 tons, the largest blocks ever quarried by human hands. Their purpose unknown, their movement unexplained. And then there are the patterns hidden in the numbers themselves. Ancient cultures used the numbers 72, 108, 216, 432 with obsessive frequency, numbers that reflect major astronomical cycles, including Earth's precession. How did civilizations that allegedly had no shared knowledge or communication all choose the same mathematical constants? How did they encode the movements of stars and planets into stone without telescopes? When you step back and view the ancient world as a whole, the pattern becomes almost impossible to ignore. We see architecture that is too precise, too similar, too advanced, too astronomically aligned to be dismissed as coincidence. We see cultures across the globe remembering the same shapes, the same numbers, the same cosmic relationships. It's as if someone taught them, not in a single moment, but across a deep forgotten past. Some researchers argue that this is simply evidence of human ingenuity. Humans are clever, resourceful, persistent. Given enough time, they say, different cultures will discover similar techniques. And that may be true for some things. But when the same architectural obsessions, astronomical alignments, and mathematical ratios emerge across continents that had no contact with each other, the argument becomes harder to accept. Because what if these weren't independent discoveries at all? What if they were fragments of a memory carried from a world that came before ours?
A memory passed down through myth, through intuition, through the subconscious echo of builders who inherited ideas too old to name? If stone is the last material to forget, then these monuments may be the final remnants of a civilization erased from the planet long before ours began. And if these structures are the surviving bones of that forgotten world, then the next clues lie where the erasure was most complete, beneath the oceans that swallowed so much of early Earth. If you could empty the oceans for just 1 hour, drain them completely, and look at the Earth as it truly is, you would never see our planet the same way again. You would see an entire world hidden beneath the waves. You would see mountains taller than the Andes, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, rivers frozen in place like ancient ghosts, and vast plains that once connected continents now separated by thousands of miles of open water. You would see the real map of Earth, the one that existed long before humans walked its surface, and the one that continues to haunt our understanding of history. And in that hour, as the oceans sank away and the drowned continents reappeared, you would finally see the truth that archaeologists have only recently begun to acknowledge. Most of human history is underwater. 12,000 years ago, the world was colder. Ice caps covered continents, locking away so much water that sea levels were more than 120 meters lower than today. What is now the seafloor was once fertile land where forests grew, animals roamed, and early humans built their first settlements. But when the Ice Age ended, the oceans rose, not slowly and gently as we like to imagine, but in terrifying surges triggered by melting glaciers, collapsing ice dams, and global climate chaos. Entire regions were swallowed in decades. Whole cultures were erased, and whatever they built was buried under water, sediment, and silence. It is no coincidence that nearly every ancient myth from every corner of the world speaks of a flood. Nor is it coincidence that the earliest chapters of human civilization appear abruptly and incompletely, as if the story begins halfway through. Because when the seas rose, they did not just claim land, they claimed memory. Today, we're finally beginning to rediscover fragments of that drowned world. Off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, lies a structure that has puzzled researchers for decades. At a depth of about 25 meters sits a massive formation with terraces, steps, and geometric planes so sharp they resemble a sunken ziggurat. Some scientists insist it is natural, a result of tectonic shifts and erosion. Others argue that the straight lines, right angles, and intentional-looking platforms suggest human craftsmanship. The truth remains elusive, but regardless of its origin, the Yonaguni monument shows one thing clearly. Beneath the sea lie shapes that challenge our assumptions about what ancient humans were capable of. Thousands of miles to the west, in the Gulf of Cambay off the coast of India, sonar scans reveal grid-like patterns stretching across several kilometers, patterns that look astonishingly similar to the remains of a city.
Divers have retrieved artifacts from the site, including tools and pottery fragments, some dated to nearly 9,000 years ago, older than any known city on land. If the site is authentic, it rewrites the timeline of urban development entirely. But because it is underwater, buried under meters of sediment, it exists in a twilight zone of archaeology, too difficult to excavate, too controversial to accept, too persistent to ignore. In the Mediterranean, near Malta, ancient walls and stone foundations lie submerged just beyond the modern shoreline, connected to megalithic temples on land. These underwater structures suggest that Malta's earliest builders once lived on coastlines long vanished beneath the sea. Similar submerged ruins exist off Greece, Cyprus, and Croatia, each discovered accidentally by divers and fishermen, each hinting at chapters of history erased by rising water. Farther north, beneath the cold waves of the North Sea, lies Doggerland, a vast region that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. It was not a tiny land bridge, but a sprawling plain of lakes, rivers, forests, and human settlements. For thousands of years, it was home to communities of hunters, gatherers, and early farmers. But around 8,000 years ago, a massive glacial collapse triggered a tsunami known as the Storegga Slide. Overnight, the sea consumed the land. Today, fishermen still pull up ancient tools, bones, and carved objects from the depths, snapshots of a lost world that vanished almost instantly. And perhaps the most haunting truth is this: Doggerland is not unique. Nearly every continent has its own version, a drowned landscape where evidence of early human life lies preserved in the cold silence of the deep. The Sunda Shelf, which once connected Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and Australia. The Sahul Shelf off the coast of New Guinea. The Caribbean Basin. The Persian Gulf Basin. All of them were once dry land. All of them likely hosted human populations. All of them are now submerged. But the ocean is not a gentle archivist. It preserves selectively. Stone survives, pottery survives, but wood decays. Textiles dissolve, metal corrodes, cities collapse into silt. After a few thousand years, the ocean does not hold cities, it holds only their faintest ghosts. Even so, the ghosts speak. With modern scanning technology, LiDAR, side-scan sonar, satellite altimetry, we are beginning to map the seafloor in ways that previous generations never could. And what we find is startling. Straight lines where nature should produce curves, stepped formations where erosion should be chaotic, circular depressions arranged too evenly to be random. Not all of these are man-made, not even most of them, but some defy easy explanation. Some resemble foundations, terraces, channels. Some resemble the bones of cities swallowed long before the first pages of written history. The problem is not that we lack evidence. The problem is that almost all of the world's prehistoric evidence is underwater, inaccessible, inconvenient, and expensive to study. Archaeology is a discipline built on land, but land is where the least of human prehistory occurred. If early humans, or earlier humans, built their first complex settlements near coastlines, as humans always have, then those coastlines are now under 40, 60, 100 meters of water. We are searching the wrong places. We are writing the story of humanity using only the surviving scraps that the sea did not take. And perhaps the most unsettling question is this: what if the real beginning of civilization lies on those drowned plains we can barely access? What if agriculture, architecture, mathematics, and astronomy began not on the visible continents we study today, but on lands now hidden beneath the waves? What if the world before the flood was not a myth, but a reality erased by rising seas? Some researchers believe that the sudden appearance of advanced stone architecture, agriculture, and urban planning around 6,000, 10,000 years ago is not the birth of civilization, but its rebirth. A reorganization by survivors who fled inland from sinking coasts, carrying fragments of knowledge from the world they lost. These fragments later solidified into what we call ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the early cultures of China and the Americas. Civilization may not have sprung up independently in multiple regions. It may have spread from a single source, a once coastal culture whose heart now lies buried underwater. This idea is not mainstream, it is not taught in schools, but the evidence grows stronger each year. The drowned world is not empty, it is full of mystery. And somewhere beneath those waves lie the missing pages of our story. Pages that could explain why so many ancient cultures built similar structures, worshipped similar gods, used similar mathematics, and told similar myths of floods, loss, and rebirth. We may never drain the oceans for an hour, but with every new scan, every new discovery, the water grows a little clearer. And the world that emerges from the depths looks less like a blank space on the map, and more like the cradle of a forgotten civilization. Across every continent, in every ancient culture, from the Arctic tundra to the islands of Polynesia, the oldest stories humanity remembers all sound strangely alike. They speak of a time before this one, a world undone by water and fire, a sky that changed shape, oceans that swallowed cities, stars that shifted their positions in ways that terrified the people who watched them, gods descending from the heavens or rising from the sea, teachers appearing from nowhere to rebuild civilization after a great destruction. And for centuries, we have dismissed these stories as myth, beautiful, poetic, imaginative, but ultimately fiction. Yet as science advances, something unexpected has happened. The stories we once ignored have begun to align disturbingly well with geological, archaeological, and astronomical evidence. Myths that sounded impossible now read like encoded eyewitness accounts of real events. Events so traumatic, so overwhelming, that ancient people could only explain them through the language of gods and cosmic forces. And once you begin to see this alignment, it becomes impossible to unsee it. Take the Great Flood. Nearly every culture on Earth, no matter how geographically isolated, has a flood myth. The Sumerians wrote of a king warned to build a great vessel. The Hebrews carried the story of Noah. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pyrrha.
Indigenous cultures in the Americas, Australia, and Southeast Asia preserved tales of rising waters swallowing entire worlds. Even tribes in the high mountains of Tibet speak of ancestors who escaped a drowning earth. For centuries, scholars treated these stories as symbolic metaphors, lessons about morality, divine judgment, or the cycles of nature. But geology tells a different story. Around 12,800 years ago, the planet entered the Younger Dryas, a sudden freeze likely triggered by a massive meltwater pulse, perhaps caused by collapsing ice sheets or even a cosmic impact. Shortly afterward, the ice melted in catastrophic bursts, releasing enough fresh water to disrupt global currents and raise sea levels with shocking speed. Some regions saw coastlines retreat miles inland within a single human lifetime. Massive floods swept across North America and Northern Europe, carving out canyons, drowning forests, scattering megafauna bones in chaotic deposits still visible today. What ancient people called the wrath of gods, we now call glacial collapse and meltwater surges. The stories and the science describe the same event, but through different languages. The parallels grow stronger when we examine myths of a world before the world. Across cultures, there are tales of a golden age, a time of great knowledge, peace, or technological prowess, followed by a sudden fall. Hindu cosmology describes cycles of creation and destruction spanning tens of thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians claimed their civilization was built on knowledge inherited from the Zep Tepi, the first time, an era ruled by beings of extraordinary skill. The Maya wrote of previous worlds destroyed by water and fire. Plato recorded the story of Atlantis, a powerful island nation that sank beneath the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune, allegedly relayed to him from Egyptian priests who said the disaster happened 9,000 years before his time. For centuries, Atlantis was dismissed as a parable, yet the timing Plato gives aligns suspiciously well with the climatic chaos of the Younger Dryas, a moment when real global flooding occurred. And while we have no proof of Atlantis, the idea of coastal civilizations being wiped out by sudden sea level rise is no longer fantastical. It is geological fact.
Then there are the sky stories, myths of stars shifting, constellations changing shape, the heavens falling, gods descending from the Orion or Sirius region. To ancient people, these were supernatural events, but astronomers now understand precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that alters the position of stars over thousands of years. Many ancient temples, from Egypt to Angkor to Teotihuacan, encode knowledge of precession into their alignments. Some match star positions not from the time they were built, but from eras thousands of years earlier, as if preserving a memory of the sky from a forgotten age. How could early civilizations track a 26,000-year cycle without telescopes? Perhaps they didn't discover it, perhaps they inherited it. Myths of gods arriving from the sea also take on new meaning when examined scientifically. In Polynesia, Viracocha in the Andes, Oannes in Mesopotamia, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, the pattern repeats. A mysterious teacher emerges from the ocean, brings knowledge of agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and morality, then disappears, promising to return. Modern interpretations see these as spiritual stories, but anthropologists note that post-catastrophe cultures often elevate surviving leaders or refugees from other regions into gods simply because they possess knowledge their new communities lost. If a coastal civilization collapsed and survivors traveled inland carrying remnants of their knowledge, how would isolated inland tribes perceive them? As ordinary humans or as luminous beings who rebuilt the world? The line between myth and memory becomes even thinner when examining stories of fire from the sky. North American legends describe a fiery serpent falling to earth, burning forests, and driving animals to extinction. Australian Aboriginal narratives recount a great spark from the heavens that scorched the land. Ancient Indian texts describe celestial weapons that sound eerily like meteor impacts. And indeed, scientists have identified impact proxies, nanodiamonds, magnetic spherules, melt glass, across several continents dating to the Younger Dryas boundary. Myths say the sky fell. Science says something hit the planet. They are not contradictions, they are translations. Even the idea of cyclical ages, golden ages, dark ages, rebirth, matches what we see in the geological record. Civilizations rise and fall, climates warm and freeze, ecosystems expand and collapse. Humanity is not separate from these cycles, we are shaped by them. Ancient people understood this intuitively, encoding these rhythms into myths that lasted thousands of years. Modern people, armed with data but stripped of myth, are only now rediscovering what ancient storytellers already knew. History is not linear. It moves in cycles, grand, slow, cosmic cycles that span far beyond the length of a human life. But the most striking overlap between myth and science is not about floods, fires, or falling stars. It is the shared sense that something came before us, something older, wiser, more aligned with the rhythms of nature. Myth calls them gods, giants, star people, or lost ancestors. Science calls them unknown cultures, genetic bottlenecks, archaeological gaps. Both are circling the same unanswered question: what happened before the world as we know it began? When you examine these parallels without prejudice, you start to see myths not as fantasies, but as compressed memories, oral archives of events so ancient that only symbolic language survived the passage of time. These stories endured because they were not fiction. They were warnings, lessons, remnants. And like geological strata or sunken ruins, they are another form of memory, one that speaks not through ice or sediment, but through human imagination. If myths are memory, and geology is evidence, and the oceans are a graveyard of civilizations, then the next step is to understand the deeper rhythm driving these cycles. Because the Earth does not destroy civilizations at random, it moves with patterns, patterns written into the planet itself. And those patterns point towards something even more unsettling, the possibility that civilization, like life itself, is cyclical, that humanity is not the beginning, but only the latest iteration of a story much older than we realize. If you watch the Earth long enough, not through the narrow lens of a human lifetime, but through the slow, patient gaze of geology, you begin to notice a pattern.
Civilizations, ecosystems, even entire epochs rise and fall not in straight lines, but in cycles. Warm periods give way to ice. Ice melts into water. Water feeds new growth, and growth eventually collapses under its own weight. Life on Earth has always followed this rhythm, and there is a growing possibility that civilization, too, is part of this cycle. Not a one-time miracle, but a recurring phenomenon that emerges, flourishes, and disappears, leaving behind only faint traces for the next iteration to find. Scientists rarely speak of this idea openly. It challenges too many assumptions, too many comfortable narratives. But the evidence grows harder to ignore each year. Something happened around 12,800 years ago that nearly ended human existence. A sudden cooling event, likely triggered by a massive influx of fresh water from collapsing ice sheets, plunged the planet back into near glacial conditions. The Younger Dryas, as it's now called, lasted roughly 1,200 years, long enough to extinguish species, erase cultures, and reset the trajectory of humanity. Genetic studies reveal that early humans went through significant bottlenecks, periods when our population shrank so dramatically that only small groups survived. During these bottlenecks, vast amounts of cultural knowledge would have been lost. Language, technology, stories, astronomy, architecture, all would have collapsed alongside the people who carried them. When humanity emerged from these dark ages, they would have had to rebuild from scratch, inheriting only scattered fragments of the world that came before. But what if those fragments were not the beginning of civilization, but the remnants of a previous cycle? In the 1950s, physicist Freeman Dyson proposed that intelligence might arise repeatedly throughout the lifespan of a planet, each time reaching a certain threshold before being interrupted by environmental catastrophe or self-inflicted collapse. More recently, astrobiologists have expanded this idea into what is now called the Silurian hypothesis, the question of whether signs of a pre-human industrial civilization might be detectable in geological records. The hypothesis is not meant to claim that such a civilization existed, but to explore what evidence it would leave behind, and, disturbingly, how similar that evidence would look to natural anomalies we already see. A civilization does not need to build skyscrapers or satellites to be advanced. It only needs to manipulate its environment, create energy systems, distribute resources, and alter its surroundings in ways distinguishable from natural processes. And if such a civilization existed hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago, the physical structures they built would be gone, eroded, subducted, dissolved, or buried by plate tectonics. Metal rusts, concrete fractures, glass becomes sand, plastics degrade under pressure and heat. After a few million years, the surface of the Earth is wiped clean. But chemical signatures remain. If an ancient civilization burned fuel, mined metals, altered soil structures, or changed atmospheric composition, those traces would persist in sediment layers. And when scientists examine core samples drawn from deep ocean floors or ancient lakebeds, they do find anomalies. They find carbon spikes unmatched by known volcanic events. They find unusual distributions of heavy metals. They find abrupt transitions between climatic phases that look eerily similar to the fingerprints of industrial activity. These anomalies are always attributed to natural causes because the alternative is simply too unsettling. But the similarities remain, like an echo of something we don't quite understand. Another piece of the puzzle lies in the disappearance of megafauna, the mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed predators that dominated Earth for millions of years. Their extinction coincides not only with human expansion, but also with environmental upheavals whose causes remain debated. Did early humans truly wipe them out with primitive tools? Or were they already collapsing due to changes in climate triggered by an earlier event, something that may have also affected human ancestors? Even more mysterious are the outliers, anomalies like the Carolina Bays, oval depressions spanning hundreds of miles, whose formation remains a mystery, or the Australasian tektite field, covering a tenth of Earth's surface with glass-like debris from an impact event whose crater has never been found. Each anomaly represents a break in the natural flow of history, a moment when something dramatic happened on a scale that could destroy civilizations, if any existed. And here lies the heart of the mystery. Civilization is fragile. We assume our cities are permanent, our knowledge secure, our technology inevitable. But history tells a different story. Rome burned. The Maya cities were swallowed by forests. The Bronze Age collapsed almost overnight, plunging the Mediterranean into centuries of darkness. Knowledge once widespread became rare, nearly lost forever. Even today, if global systems failed, energy, communication, agriculture, most of our knowledge would vanish within a generation. Our memory is not as durable as we like to pretend. So imagine a civilization living during a warm interglacial period, long before ours. Imagine them reaching a level of sophistication, music, astronomy, navigation, mathematics, comparable to early Mesopotamia or Egypt.
Imagine them building along coastlines now buried deep beneath the sea. And imagine them facing a global catastrophe, a sudden freeze, an asteroid impact, a mantle plume eruption, a series of superstorms, or simply the slow crushing weight of time itself. Their cities dissolve, their tools vanish, their descendants scatter, their knowledge becomes myth, their memory fades. Then, tens of thousands of years later, the cycle repeats. Humans rise again, new humans, unrelated or distantly related. They inhabit the same lands, follow the same migratory paths, look up at the same stars. They discover fire, agriculture, architecture, astronomy, not because they are copying their ancestors directly, but because the planet favors certain pathways. Intelligence gravitates toward familiar patterns. Civilizations reflect natural laws. And so the cycle continues: build, collapse, rebuild. This perspective forces us to rethink everything we assume about our uniqueness. Perhaps humanity is not a lone miracle, but part of a recurring pattern in Earth's long story. Perhaps intelligence emerges whenever conditions are right, just as forests grow when the climate warms or coral reefs bloom in clear, shallow seas. Perhaps we are not the first to ask who we are, how we came to be, or what came before us. And perhaps the clues scattered across geology, mythology, architecture, and the ocean floor are not the artifacts of an alien intervention or a lost super technology, but simple reminders that civilizations have risen before and will rise again. It is a humbling thought, but also a liberating one, because if civilization is cyclical, then our own future is not predetermined. We can choose whether to repeat the mistakes of those lost worlds or learn from the warnings embedded in stone and story. The cycles of Earth are vast, but they are not indifferent. They respond to our actions, and they will judge whether our iteration of civilization survives or becomes just another layer of sediment, a memory waiting for the next species to uncover. The question is no longer, were we the first? The question is, will we be the last? Every civilization believes, in its own time, that it stands at the peak of human achievement. It believes that its knowledge is permanent, its structures enduring, its ideals invincible. The Romans believed this, the Maya believed it, the ancient dynasties of China believed it. The pharaohs believed it so deeply they carved their names into stone, confident they would echo through eternity. Yet all of them fell. Not because they lacked intelligence or strength, but because the world around them shifted in ways they could not control, or in ways they failed to foresee. And now we, living in the most technologically advanced age humanity has ever known, face the same illusion. We imagine ourselves untouchable, protected by our machines, our data, our global networks. But the Earth is older than our pride. It has erased worlds more enduring than ours. It has seen creatures far stronger,
more adaptable, more resilient than humans, come and go in the blink of geological time. If intelligence has risen more than once on this planet, if civilizations have already lived and died before us, then we are not the inevitable outcome of evolution. We are simply the latest expression of a repeating pattern. And patterns, by their nature, continue. When scientists study extinction events, they always find the same ingredients: a disruption in climate, a collapse of food chains, a shift in atmospheric chemistry, a sudden geological event, or, in some cases, a slow degradation of the environment caused by the dominant species itself. These forces have shaped life on Earth for billions of years. They are not selective. They do not care how tall your buildings are or how advanced your tools might be. They do not spare civilizations because they produce art, mathematics, philosophy, or music. They erase whatever stands in their path and make room for what comes next. So the real question isn't whether an ancient civilization existed. The question is whether ours will survive long enough to be remembered. When future scientists drill into the layers of Earth, what will they find? A thin line of plastic molecules, a spike in carbon isotopes, traces of rare metals used in electronics, a rapid decline in biodiversity, signals identical to the ones we now search for in the deep past, evidence that another civilization once lived here, us, only to vanish in the same way those before us might have. We already know how easily memory fades. If our electrical grids failed tomorrow, if our digital archives collapsed, if our cities fell silent, how long would it take before our knowledge disappeared? A century? 2? Within one human lifetime, most technologies would become incomprehensible. Within 2, our great libraries of data would be inaccessible. Within 3, our languages would fracture, shift, or die. In 1,000 years, only ruins would remain, and even those would crumble. In 10,000 years, the forests would reclaim the land. In 100,000, almost nothing of us, our stories, our fears, our hope, would survive except for subtle chemical fingerprints trapped in rock and ice. Just as we search now for clues about the world that came before us, future beings, whether human or something else, may search for clues about us. They may wonder who carved the cities now swallowed by soil. They may puzzle over the remnants of our technology. They may ask why we disappeared and whether we too believed we were eternal. History is not a straight line marching forward. It is a heartbeat, a pulse, a rise and fall repeated across the vast canvas of time. Civilizations grow in the fertile valleys between catastrophe and equilibrium. They peak. They extend their influence. They transform the planet around them. And then, inevitably, they face the boundary, the moment when the environment changes faster than they can adapt, or when their own innovations outpace their wisdom. We stand closer to that boundary than we want to admit. But unlike the civilizations before us, those whose traces lie underwater, in ice cores, in forgotten myths, we possess something they may not have had: awareness. We know that climate can change abruptly. We know ecosystems can collapse. We know technological progress can outrun our ability to manage it. We know that even the smallest shift in the planet's balance can trigger cascading disasters. We also know that we are powerful, perhaps too powerful. We can alter landscapes in decades, heat the atmosphere in a century, wipe out species in years. In the deep past, it took a comet, a supervolcano, or a planetary shift to reshape the world. Today, it takes us. We have become a geological force, and geological forces are never immune to the consequences they unleash. And yet, within that realization lies our greatest hope. If civilization is cyclical, that means collapse is not destiny. It is a choice. It is the outcome of failure, failure to adapt, failure to understand, failure to act. But cycles can be interrupted, patterns can be broken.
A species capable of reading the past is a species capable of rewriting the future. We may not be the first civilization on Earth.
We may not be the first to build cities, measure the stars, or chart the seas, but we could be the first to survive the turning of the cycle, the first to see disaster coming and change course, the first to honor the memory of the worlds that came before, not through myth or cautionary tales, but through deliberate, conscious action. When we look at the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, the drowned plains of Doggerland, the shattered layers of the Younger Dryas, or the mysterious chemical signatures hidden in ancient stone, we are not looking at fantasies. We are looking at warnings. We are looking at the possibility that intelligence is fragile and that memory, true memory, must be preserved not just in stories or monuments, but in action. Because if we fail, our future will look exactly like the past. A thin, silent line in the rock, a missing chapter, another world that rose, reached for the stars, and then vanished without a trace. We are not the first, but we can choose whether we are the last. In the end, the question that brought us here has never really been about the past. It's been about us, about who we are in this moment, standing on a planet that has witnessed more than we can imagine. We've walked through forgotten ruins, drowned continents, ancient myths, geological scars, and the silent language of stone. And through every step of that journey, one truth has become impossible to ignore. The Earth is old, older than our stories, older than our fears, older than any civilization that has ever risen upon its surface. And somewhere in that depth of time, memory repeats itself. We may never know the full story of the worlds that came before us. Their cities may be dust, their knowledge lost to rising seas and shifting continents, their memories scattered into myth, their warnings carved into stone too ancient for us to fully understand. But their shadows remain, faint outlines of possibilities, reminders that intelligence is not guaranteed and that survival demands more than pride. As we move forward, we carry the weight of that realization, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Because unlike those who came before, we have the rare privilege of foresight. We can see the cycles, we can read the signs, and we can choose whether to repeat the pattern or to break it. If this journey has shifted something in you, if it opened a door or sparked a new question, then stay with us.
There are more mysteries buried in the deep past, more forgotten stories waiting to resurface, more chapters of humanity that have yet to be written. So if you want to continue exploring the hidden layers of our world, consider subscribing. Join us as we search for the truths that time tried to erase, and the future that still lies within our hands.